Nirguna Brahman, qualityless, attributeless Brahman, is the solitary reality. That Brahman alone exists is the meaning of non-duality. It is said that all of this, the entirety of one's experience, from subtlest thought, ranging from subtlest thought to the forms of objects of the world, is Saguna Brahman, Brahman with attributes, Brahman with qualities. There are not two types of Brahman. The meaning is clear, that all this is only Brahman, and Brahman alone exists. The notion of differentiation of any kind arises entirely dependent upon the previous assumption, purely imagined, of an individual, I. All the differences appear in the midst of that which is undifferentiated, starting with the notion of I. All disturbance appears in the midst of that which is all peace, only starting with the notion of I, the supposition that there is some existent individual. It is an assumed misidentification. Likewise, all suffering, worry, fear, etc., in the midst of great bliss appears, starting with the notion of I. And all bondage has its start in the midst of immense freedom, only with the notion of I. How is this notion imagined? For whom is it imagined? The Maharshi has taught that we should inquire as to who am I, in order to realize conclusively the self as being the solitary reality. Who am I? If only that inquiry is made, profoundly so, the very root, the very source of all the illusions mentioned, of all differentiation, proves to be non-existent. With the root or cause absent, the effect is also absent. The individual and his lifetime's long story both disappear because they are unreal. Brahman remains, as Brahman alone has existed always. What is it that is real? Only the indefinable Brahman. What was all that disappeared? Nothing but Brahman. And Brahman is invariable in its nature. Inquire, know the true nature of yourself, and thus abide in that as that. This being realized, there is nothing further to be attained. In that, all questions are answered, all doubts resolved, all illusions are gone. Abandon the misidentification, if there be any, with the differentiated body and mind and ego. And know the self, the solitary existence, just as it is. And if at any point you have a question, please feel free to ask. Or if you wish to relate your own experience, please feel free to speak.
On Friday night, you had a dialogue with Jim in which he was describing having these experiences of the day intrude into his meditation. I've had similar experience where I'm reliving something, daydreaming something, and I believe I've alluded to it even here that I then have had the experience that when I asked, who is this in this situation, the situation just sort of dissolves, yet I am still present. My question is though, so I get that part. The question is, how do you distinguish or how do you deal with when the experience is first coming into your senses? In other words, the memory of the experience is one thing that I can have dissolved, but when the experience is actually first occurring, how can I also separate myself from that?
The same principle will work. The same delusion is also at work.
Mm-hmm.
If you cease to regard it as real, and you cease to misidentify as the individual character seems wrapped up in it, that's the most important part. It will dissolve.
It seems like it's way easier to do that when you're sitting here in a meditation hall and the experience is just happening in your mind, in your thoughts.
Perhaps you're sitting in meditation all the time.
But that's what I need to practice.
You may not be bodily in sitting,
Mm-hmm.
but in a profound sense, you're in meditation all the time. And the apparently vivid sense experience is no different than a dream. Before inquiring to rid yourself of the difficulties of a memory or a daydream, you could easily register the complaint that it seems so vivid, it seems like it's going on, it seems so real. However, upon a little inquiry, it's not so real. The same is true with all sense experience. It's imperative that the misidentification with the body be relinquished in order to reach such freedom. If the I am the body conception is retained, you will feel as if in the experience. And it will be seemingly difficult to extricate yourself from the limitations of it. If the I am the body conception is destroyed, then you are not in the situation.
Now or then.
Now or then. And at either time, it's just images appearing in you. If then further inquiry is made as to who you are, the images cease, for they are not real. And what remains is the actual existence. Is it clear for you?
It may be after I listen to it a few more times on your CD, on the CD. Which is always the case.
Digital satsang. Yeah. When you find yourself in some circumstance that seems limiting, overwhelming, overpowering, in some way binding, first and foremost, know where your bliss is. Secondly, abandon the I am the body misconception. You can inquire further from there, but even that much, then see what your experience is like.
A question relating to kind of what Carol was saying. Like, for me, it's like reading text. Holy text is like the digital satsang. And I was wondering, like reading the Karika of Gaudapada, like when people voice that complaint or in the text, and there is no complaint, I see myself always kind of skimming quickly because it's not of interest. But they must have put that in there for some reason when they put doubt.
Mm-hmm.
And then an explanation for that. Because should I really read thoroughly through that also? Or is that okay to just dismiss it? Because I remember years before, I would never read the commentaries. Because the truth, I love the truth as it is. But
the commentaries are only for the purpose of elucidating the nature of that truth. There can be no hard and fast rule of whether you should read it or should not read it. In Gaudapada's Karika, in the 4th chapter, he shows certain doubts that could arise, or different viewpoints. And in Shankara's Bhashya, or commentary, throughout the text, he brings up various questions or doubts. Sometimes in the English translation printed as objections, but really they're doubts or questions that could arise for someone who's trying to meditate on the very thing that Gaudapada or the Upanishad has just declared. Then he gives an appropriate answer, showing the way to meditate or the knowledge that should be shining in one in order to eliminate that doubt. If you find it useful, read it. If you're already beyond that doubt, it's optional.
Mm-hmm. And also thank you today, this discourse just incredible.
Ultimately, all the doubts and their answers are for one purpose, that is the revelation of the self, which is beyond doubt for anyone. Therefore, the answers, whether provided by Gaudapada or Shankara in his commentary, are for really the purpose of bringing about a cessation of misidentification and a clarity of knowledge regarding one's true identity, in which case the doubt is resolved, the question is answered at the deepest possible level. If commentaries upon a text are read as a form of guidance for meditation, they're generally of more use to the seeker of truth than if they're read as if just a logical discussion about some topic.
Since Friday, I've been meditating on the mind and does it really exist? In my existence, there is clearly no mind. It just doesn't occur in what I know is my essence. So, I was just meditating, if it's not there, where is it? And does it... That's the only thing that's clearly real and existent. And the mind is not part of that.
It's not part of that, but it's not apart from that.
It kind of appears, that's the part that I think I need to straighten out, because it does appear to be part of it. Or it appears to be so different in its nature that it doesn't affect existence at all. Has no... So
It doesn't affect existence because it is so different in quality or in character. But does it exist on its own?
No, it's kind of like a cloud doesn't exist without the sky.
So it's in the sky and of the sky, but you wouldn't call the cloud the sky.
Well, it leads me to ask them, what is this thing that I think is, or how can I come up with something that truly doesn't exist on its own, and it's funny when I start asking the question, it's sort of like, what is this thing that I'm thinking about? I can't really get a hold of the thing that I think is not real, but it's not even there when
Are you attempting to define the mind using the mind? If so, how will you get an accurate definition?
I think that's what I'm doing. It's like trying to use the mind to understand itself when it has no real capacity to do that.
That is, as the Maharshi says, taking the thief, dressing him up as a policeman to catch the thief, which is himself, and for some reason he's not apprehended. We could say that consciousness plus thought, that is, consciousness plus objectivity, appears as a mind that then says, I know. This that it knows could be anything. Can we then make an objective study of the mind that is containing all the objectivity? If the inquiry is non-objective in nature, what is left to the mind?
There's just sky.
So Vasishta says that the mind is like the movement of wind in air. The air, or the sky, being the representative of the consciousness. Is the wind made of anything but air? Does it have an existence separate from the air? Does it go anywhere, no matter how fast it goes, outside of the air?
No, it doesn't become separate, and it has its own little reality. It's always here.
Consciousness unmoving, vast and infinite, is the real self. The same consciousness regarded as moving appears as a mind. Of course, in highest truth, the immovable does not move. Brahman is invariable. If you want to know the nature of the mind, you must actually inquire and not attempt to use the same mental processes that are said to constitute the mind in order to try to determine what it is. So actually inquiring as to your nature, as to what your experience really is. What can you say about your mind?
I don't have one.
If you do not have one, is it elsewhere? Is there another space in which it can be?
No, there isn't.
So to say that you are the witness of the mind and still regard the mind as existent is a first step, an important one. But when the nature of the witness is realized to be infinite, undifferentiated consciousness, then that alone is found to exist. And there is no more question of a mind.
You know, a very deep meditation on Friday. And I guess from that experience, I kind of was thinking, okay, that kind of deeper knowledge, or I guess lack of ignorance, is probably more closer to enlightenment. In other words, just the fact that you don't identify with an ignorant one is really so important, because from there, just like you keep saying and you read in the holy books, we were reading the Maharshi last night, and it all comes from where you identify, right? So in other words, if the root is an ego, from there is going to spring a body in the world, or a mind in the world. So it seems like I kind of know in my heart that, okay, you really have to know this. But remember, like a week ago, we were reading the Maharshi, and he said something like, meditation should go on always, even when the body's not seated. Something like this.
Okay.
And I can kind of see that the deeper, or the less ignorance I have, the more that's possible. However, it does seem to take something, right? Because if there's ignorance, there's, you need to figure out what the cause, not the cause, but you kind of have to put some energy into, saying, okay, stop doing this.
Right, you have to trace it to its root, which is the false definition. All the ignorance is subsumed under the definition of ego, of I. So tracing it that way is part of meditation. When the ignorance vanishes, that's also meditation, isn't it?
Yeah, that's definitely meditation, because no ignorance is automatic meditation.
Then meditation is the natural interior knowledge.
Yeah, so that's sort of why I say that lack of ignorance seems like meditation goes on. And I can see that, sometimes it's the mind may be occupied in something. And all of a sudden, it just occurs like, what is really happening? And then you kind of discover and you say, oh yeah, what's really happening is not the occupation of the mind, but something much deeper.
The mind's occupation with its own thoughts is never a concern for you, is it? You are always beyond the content, the presence, even the absence of thought.
But because what I was describing, though, is that two different states. One was a recognition of something deeper,
When you recognize what is deeper, does what is deeper just start then? Does it commence with the recognition, or is the recognition just a recognition of what is already the case? Now, are there two of you? The one who has recognized the real self, and the other who gets preoccupied and wakes up again?
That's the idea, is that there's two, in this particular case, there's two selves.
All right, but is there really an individual who can get caught up in the mind's occupation and then free himself from it? If he's caught up, he must free himself of it. That's axiomatic. But is there really a second one? Is there anything constituting your identity except that immaculate, ever-free existence?
Because in a certain sense, yeah, whenever it's investigated, it seems not to be there. However, if it's not investigated, it's kind of just assumed, and then there's a box, wherever that imagined box is. You're saying that box really is just total imagination. In other words, that box was made up of myself.
Yes, if you're right if you say if it is assumed, then there's everything that follows. If it's not assumed, the reality's shining. Is there a place for that assumption to occur in the reality? Can there be a box, as you called it, in the infinite space-like consciousness?
Yeah, the box being composed of ignorance. I mean, in other words, some sort of boundary.
It's ignorance, it's the potential for ignorance, it's the one who is ignorant, without whom there cannot be any ignorance, all in one.
Because how could there be two, in a sense? Because 1 second it appears to be there, and the next second it's gone, right?
And for whom does it appear to be?
In this case, it doesn't seem like it appears to be for the ego.
Yet when it is gone, the one for whom it is gone, it's always gone. Isn't that so?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So for the ever-liberated one, there has been no bondage. The ego, which is but a false assumption, cannot in reality assume itself.
Yeah, that sort of seemed clear from what you were just asking, that
Being consciousness is invariable and has no ignorance. It's what remains when everything is said to be gone. The real will not imagine the unreal. The unreal cannot truthfully imagine itself. There is not a third alternative. There can't be something partially real and partially unreal, otherwise that would be subject to discrimination to divide the unreal from the real part. See your own experience. The ignorance cannot be supposed by the real self, and it can't suppose itself. When in your experience you say the ignorance is gone, what remains was actually always there, all by itself. Nothing actually got created. And so in the highest sense, nothing got destroyed. So the holy texts say, because there's no non-enlightenment, there's no enlightenment.
Yeah. That's. But with Saraswati's question, about these holy texts, I was thinking that the sages can really enjoy them because they understand from where they're coming from.
Mm-hmm.
And the aspirants, and I'm talking about myself in this case, it takes more, I don't know, they're pushing you in a direction where you have to, lose that ignorance, right? In other words, that's where you really understand it. Without that loss of...
They thrust you in a direction in which you are called upon to abandon whatever misidentification that makes the truth revealed therein appear as not self-evident. Once the misidentification is eradicated, the truth is self-evident.
So in a certain sense, you almost have to be very introverted when you read a holy book, because you have to see how it applies. At what point you have to be able to identify your ignorance in a certain sense.
So there are many ways of reading a sacred text, but the best is to do so as in a state of profound meditation, in which the inquiry regarding what your identity is the focus while you're reading. Then the descriptions of reality or of liberation are all about you. And the elimination of some delusion is not so much elimination of delusion for some other guy, some other time, but it's elimination of your own.
In a certain sense, the holy books and even talking to the sages, including Satsang here, it seems like what happened, because it's so absolute. In other words, there's not, partial ignorance. There's no gradual steps to enlightenment. There's no such thing as enlightenment. In that it comes from such a high place. So I was noticing that every answer you give, and including the holy books, right, is very, even the smallest step is very deep.
Mm-hmm.
Even, not noticing you're not the body. I mean, that's a very deep step, right? I mean, because you
It's
go,
very deep when you consider what all the consequences of that are. It's extraordinarily deep. As for association of the wise, whether it's through the written form or verbal form or in silence, as the Maharshi has said, you catch the samadhi habit from them. Here samadhi means sahaja, natural absorption.
there's no question that is, because they don't, they don't allow you to hold on to ignorance. I mean, they can't take it away. I mean, you have to eliminate, but they're guiding light to that, and I think it's invaluable, right? Because how, if you take your mind to be yourself, that's, it's just hard to notice anything beyond it, I guess, right? So you believe that is your master. So when the sage says, you're not the body, you're not the mind,
It becomes invaluable. But it's not just a verbal discussion.
yes.
It's not just something the two parties are thinking about. It is something far deeper, more of the matter of direct and immediate experience. In the end, having discarded the body, mind, and such as definitions, it is only one light shining for itself.
So, you're saying that essentially sage is not the body, not the mind. It's standing.
And likewise the one who questions him. So there is neither a bound one nor a liberated one, neither a disciple nor a guru, neither an instructed nor an instructor. Just one light shining for itself. You answer your own question, and you yourself are the answer. That you is what I am.
Thank you, Master. In order to get the benefit of any of the commentary you might have on it, I wanted to sort of present an oversimplification, but
Not just a simplification, but an oversimplification.
well, I mean, I don't want to claim it has any more value than it may have, but in receiving absolute teaching, in a certain sense, I could describe it as a mixture of an unmistakable ring of truth, maybe with a little bewilderment on my part. That would be a simplification of the experience. there's that ring of truth, and then there's a little bewilderment. And they probably both have, liberating value, but if I look to undo the bewilderment, I get the sense that each illusion is mutually supporting other illusions, somewhat like a house or a structure of cards. There's nothing really holding it all together, but the bewilderment would be an unnecessary focus on, well, what's this card, or how does this card work, or how did these cards come to being? And it seems like the sages are always pointing to the advice of go for the bottom card, and the foundation on which it would seem to appear. That bottom card being the assumption of an individual ego, and the foundation being itself. If that be the direction, then the cards will always be collapsing. And there's need be no question of what's this card, what's that card, how did it come to be. So the bewilderment sort of gets swept aside, and what's left is that the ring of truth was pointing right to the core being. And it seems useful for me to have even if it's a silly analogy like that, just have a reminder to myself to not get too focused on what is this card, what is that card, but go to the core of that the teaching is pointing to.
That's right.
And I guess the second thing would be that there's no reason to wait. I mean, it's never too early to do that, so to speak. In other words, nothing else has to happen first.
There's never a reason to delay spiritually. You never have to do something first before you commence an inquiry to know your own nature. Your own existence, the self, is already there. If preparation were needed, it is the preparation. You can always inquire.
श्रद्धाकर्पडविरचितकन्ध पुण्यविवर्जितपन्थः शून्यागारे तिष्ठति नग्नो शुद्धनिरञ्जनसमरसमग्नः.
Avadhuta said, "The Avadhuta wears a patched garment made of rags cast off by the side of the street. He walks a path which is free from virtue and vice. Absorbed in the pure, unpolluted bliss of Brahman, the carefree mendicant lives in a deserted place."
Laksha vivarjita laksho युक्तायुक्तविवर्जितदक्षः केवलतत्त्वनिरञ्जनपूतो वादविवादकथमवधूतः.
The signs of the Avadhuta may or may not be visible. Although he is beyond right and wrong, he is absolutely honest. His real nature is perfect, pure, and spotless. How is it possible for such an illumined soul to become involved in arguments and disputations?
आशापाशविबन्धनमुक्ताः शौचाचारविवर्जितयुक्ताः एवं सर्वविवर्जितशान्तः तत्त्वं शुद्धनिरञ्जनवन्तः.
The Avadhuta is free from the captivating trap of desire. Shunning physical tidiness and social niceties, he is absorbed in the Supreme Spirit. Thus, renouncing everything, he becomes one with the pure, stainless Brahman.
Kathamiha deha videha vicharaha Kathamiha raga viraga vicharaha Nirmala nischala gaganakaram Swayamiha tattvam sahajakaram.
In this state of realization, how can the Avadhuta consider whether he has a body or not, or whether he has attachment or not? He himself is the immaculate, immovable, innate reality, infinite as space.
Kathamiha tattvam vindadi yatra Rupamarupam kathamiha tatra Gaganakara paramo yatra Vishayikaranam kathamiha tatra.
In this state of realization, how and where can one know the reality? How can there be any form or formlessness? When the Supreme Reality is all-pervading like space, how can one objectify it?
Gaganakara nirantara hamsaha Tattva vishuddha niranjana hamsaha Evam kathamiha bhinna vibhinnam Bandha vibhandha vikara vibhinnam.
Brahman is all-pervading like space, and its essential nature is pure and spotless. Therefore, how can there be division and multiplication, bondage and liberation, and various other modifications in it?
Kevala tattva nirantara sarvam Yoga viyogo kathamiha garvam Evam parama nirantara sarvam Evam kadamiha sara visaram.
The absolute Brahman pervades all equally. How can one feel union or separation there? Since the Supreme Brahman is identical in all, how can there be any variation of strength or weakness?
Kevala tattva niranjana sarvam Gaganakara nirantara shuddham Evam kathamiha sanga visangam Satyam kathamiha ranga virangam.
The absolute Brahman shines equally in all. It is clear and all-pervasive like space. Truly, how can there be any friendship or enemy, mirth or misery in it?
Yoga viyogairahito yogi Bhoga vibhogairahito yogi Evam charadihi mandam mandam Manasa kalpita sahajanandam.
The Avadhuta may or may not observe the rules of yoga. Still, he is a yogi. He may or may not have any possessions. Still, he is an enjoyer. Indeed, he moves slowly and calmly and enjoys the natural bliss arising from his own pure mind.
Bodha vibodhai satatam yukto dvaita dvaitai kadamiha muktaha sahajo virajat kadamiha yogi shuddha niranjana samarasa bhogi.
As long as a person has both knowledge and ignorance, and a sense of duality and non-duality, how can he be liberated? Why should one who always enjoys the pure, unadulterated bliss of Brahman, and whose innate nature is free from desire and ignorance, try to be a yogi?
Bhagna bhagna vivarjita bhagno Lagna lagna vivarjita lagnaha Evam kadamiha sara visaraha Samarasa tattvam gaganakaraha.
As it is beyond whole and part, there is no division in Brahman. Brahman is not attached to anything because it is beyond attachment and non-attachment. Since it is all-pervading existence, like space, how can there be any contraction or expansion?
Satatam sarva vivarjita yuktaha Sarvam tattva vivarjita muktaha Evam kadhamiha jivita maranam Dhyana dhyane kadhamiha karanam.
Renouncing everything, the Avadhuta is always united with Brahman. Transcending all elements, he is free. How can there be either life or death for him? What does it matter whether he practices meditation or not?
Indrajalamidam sarvam yadha marumarichika Aghandidamanakaro vartate kevala shivaha.
This whole world is an illusion, like a mirage in a desert. The indivisible, formless, supreme beatitude alone exists.
Dharmadau moksha paryantam niraha sarvadha vayam kadham raga viragaischa kalpayanti vipaschitaha.
We, the Avadhutas, never desire righteousness, wealth, enjoyment, or liberation. How then do the scholars imagine that we have attachment or detachment?
Vindadi vindadi nahi nahi yatra Chando lakshanam nahi nahi tatra Samarasamagno bhavita putaha Pralabati tattvam paramavadhutaha.
Where the intellect cannot reach, how can there be any form of composition? The great Avadhuta, after purifying himself through meditation and becoming absorbed in infinite bliss, has sung spontaneously about Brahman.